Some men on the frontier viewed the world as a thing to be owned. Land, gold, even people. They saw strength only in a straight back and a quick draw, and they believed a man's worth was measured by the acres he could tame. But they often misjudged the value of what they so carelessly discarded. They mistook resilience for fragility and silence for weakness. In the summer of 1878, in a dusty Wyoming railroad town that smelled of coal smoke and greed, a man named Silas Thorne made just such a miscalculation, and it would change the plains forever. May Lynn stood on the splintered boardwalk, a crimson silk flower blooming in a world of dust and sun-bleached wood. Her red cheongsam, embroidered with golden phoenixes, was the last remnant of a life that now felt like a dream. She had been brought across the ocean under the pretense of a respectable marriage contract, only to find herself the property of Thorne, a man whose smile never reached his cold, calculating eyes. He paraded her through the town, his prize, an exotic curiosity for the rough men who stared, their expressions a mixture of awe and contempt. Today, he'd announced, was her wedding day. He led her not to a church, but to a wagon on the edge of town. "A wedding gift, my dear," he said, his voice slick with false generosity. He handed her a deed. It was for a small plot of land nestled against the foothills, a place the locals called Blackwood's Folly. The real gift, the true heart of his cruel joke, was waiting for her inside the cabin that sat upon it. He helped her into the wagon, his touch lingering on her arm just long enough to be a threat before he and his men rode off, their laughter carried back on the hot, dry air. The wagon left her in a cloud of dust before a dilapidated cabin that seemed to be slowly surrendering to the elements. The door hung crooked on one hinge. A single window was dark with grime. For a long moment, May Lynn simply stood there, the deed clutched in her hand, the silence of the vast landscape pressing in on her. This was not a home. It was a cage. It was an exile. Taking a breath that did little to steady her trembling, she pushed the door. It groaned open into a single gloomy room that smelled of stale air, old whiskey, and a profound, settled despair. Her eyes, accustomed to the bright glare outside, took a moment to adjust. In the far corner, shrouded in shadow, was a figure. A man sat in a crude wooden chair with two large wheels, his back to her. He was large, with shoulders that strained the fabric of his worn shirt, and a tangle of dark hair that fell past his collar. He did not turn. "The door was closed for a reason," he said. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble, like stones grinding together at the bottom of a river. "Close it on your way out." May Lynn found her own voice, a thing smaller and thinner than she remembered. "Mr. Thorne, he sent me here." At that, the man slowly, deliberately turned his chair. His face was all harsh angles, framed by a thick, unkempt beard. But it was his eyes that held her. They were a startling slate gray, and in their depths was a fire that had long ago burned down to bitter embers. "Thorne!" He spat the name like a curse. Of course, another piece of his collection. He looked her over, from her silk slippers to the jade pins in her hair, then gestured with a bitter finality at his own useless legs. "He gave you a broken man and a dying piece of land. It's his idea of a joke. Now get out. I don't need an audience." She did not leave. To flee would be to surrender to Silas Thorne, to accept her role as a helpless victim in his cruel theater. A cold, unfamiliar resolve began to solidify in her chest. She had survived an ocean, betrayal, and humiliation. She would survive this. Without a word, she turned from the man in the chair and began to survey her new prison. The cabin was a study in neglect. A thick layer of dust coated every surface, stirred into dancing motes by the light slanting through the grimy window. The hearth was a black maw filled with old ashes, and a single pot, crusted with the remains of some long-ago meal, sat on a hook. In a corner she found a worn broom made of bundled twigs. The rhythmic scrape of it against the wooden floorboards was the only sound, a small, defiant act against the suffocating silence. The man, Asher Blackwood, watched her, a muscle working in his jaw. He had expected tears. He had expected pleading or a panicked retreat back to the town she had just left. He had not expected this quiet, furious industry from a woman who looked as if she had never known a moment of hardship in her life. She worked for hours, her movements economical and precise, sweeping away the layers of dust and despair. When she finished, she found the pantry. It was a pathetic sight. A small sack containing a handful of mealy beans, a tin of weevil-infested flour, and a jar of dried apples, half eaten by mice. Starvation was not a distant threat. It was a guest already sitting at their table. Outside, beyond the sagging porch, was a patch of sun-scorched earth sectioned off by a collapsing fence. Weeds choked what might have once been a garden. Leaning against the cabin wall was a rusted hoe. That evening, using the last of the clean water from a barrel, she made a thin, watery bean soup. She poured it into 2 bowls, placing one on the small, unsteady table and the other on a crate beside his chair. He said nothing, turning his face to the window as if she did not exist. But the next morning, when the first light crept into the cabin, she saw that his bowl was empty. Summer on the high plains was a merciless anvil. The sun rose each morning like a brassy fist, beating down on the cracked earth until the very air seemed to shimmer with heat. Maylin's red silk cheongsam was a torment, clinging to her skin, its vibrant color a stark mockery of their drab existence. Yet she refused to set it aside. It was her armor, a final link to the person she had been. She traded her silk slippers for a pair of worn-out men's boots she found in a dusty crate, and she began the back-breaking work of reclaiming the garden. Her hands, once accustomed to the delicate arts of calligraphy and embroidery, were soon raw, then blistered, then finally hardened into a network of calluses as tough as old leather. She learned the rhythms of the land not by choice, but by brutal necessity. She learned which weeds were stubborn, which insects were pests, and how the angle of the sun dictated the thirst of the new sprouts. Asher watched it all from the shade of the porch, a silent, brooding sentinel in his chair. His contempt had slowly given way to a grudging curiosity. He watched her struggle to haul buckets from the deep well, her slight frame straining with the effort. One afternoon, as she nearly toppled over from the weight, his voice startled her. "Use your legs, not your back. Keep your spine straight." It was not spoken with kindness, but it was advice. Practical. Necessary. It was the first crack in the wall of his bitterness. Gradually he began to speak more often, his words always short, clipped commands about the land he knew so intimately. "That soil is too clay-heavy for carrots. Try the other side of the cabin." Or, "Water in the evening. The sun'll steal it otherwise." He was a part of this place, tethered to it, even if he could no longer walk upon it. A fragile, unspoken truce formed between them, woven from the shared sunlight, the ache in their muscles, and the common enemy of starvation. One day she returned from the creek to find he had used a long stick to draw a diagram in the dust, showing her how to plant corn, beans, and squash together, so the beans would climb the stalks and the squash would shade the roots. It was the first time he had offered help without her asking. A rider appeared one sweltering afternoon, a dark silhouette against the shimmering heat haze. As he drew closer, Maylin recognized the swaggering posture of one of Thorne's men, a brute named Calloway. He reined in his horse, letting it drink greedily from their water trough before spitting a stream of tobacco juice near her feet. "Well now, look at this," he drawled, his eyes roaming over her with casual insolence. "The porcelain doll playing in the dirt. A regular homesteader." He chuckled, a harsh, grating sound that set her teeth on edge. "Mr. Thorne sends his regards. He wonders how you're enjoying his little jest." Asher had heard the horse. He rolled his chair to the doorway, his large hands gripping the wheels until his knuckles were white. His face was a thundercloud of controlled rage. "Get off this land, Calloway." The man merely sneered, his gaze flicking to Asher's paralyzed form. "This ain't your land no more, Blackwood. Hasn't been since you got too proud to sell it for a fair price. It's funny what a falling log can do to a man's pride, ain't it?" The words hung in the oppressive, heavy air, each one a poisoned dart. A falling log. It wasn't an accident. It was an attack, a punishment for defiance. Thorne hadn't just taken Asher's ability to walk. He had tried to take his life, and then mocked him with this slow death. Calloway, satisfied with the pain he had inflicted, tugged on his reins. "You two enjoy the quiet," he said, his smile all teeth. He spurred his horse and rode away, his laughter trailing behind him. Maylin looked from the retreating rider to the man in the doorway. She saw him now not just as a broken man, but as a wronged one, a victim of the same casual cruelty that had marooned her here. The stakes were no longer just about their own survival. They were about justice. The poisoned truth Calloway had delivered settled like a shroud over the small cabin. Asher retreated even further into himself, his silence now heavier, colder, laced with the renewed agony of his humiliation. The brutal summer heat seemed to fester within the small space, mirroring the infection of anger and shame that was eating at him from the inside. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of bruised purple, Maylin found him slumped in his chair, his skin alarmingly hot to the touch, and his breathing shallow and ragged. A fever had taken hold, a virulent blaze born from an infected pressure sore on his back, a wound he had been too proud and too ashamed to mention. For 3 days and nights she became his nurse. The world shrank to the confines of that small room, to the tasks of survival. She bathed his brow with cool water from the well, the simple act an incredible intimacy. She made poultices from yarrow and plantain leaves she gathered by the creek, her movements gentle and sure as she tended to the angry wound. It was an intimacy born of pure, desperate necessity, stripping away all pretense of pride or propriety between them. In his delirium he mumbled half-formed words about the crisp scent of pine high in the mountains, about a brother lost at Shiloh, about the coldness of the river. And once, in a moment of startling clarity, he whispered her name. Maylin. It was not girl or woman, but her name, spoken with a softness she had never heard from him. When the fever finally broke on the 4th morning, leaving him weak but clear-eyed, a new quiet settled between them. It was not the hostile silence of before, but something softer, more contemplative. He would watch her move about the cabin, his gaze no longer just holding respect for her tenacity, but something deeper, more vulnerable. He had allowed her to see him at his absolute weakest, and she had not fled. She had saved him. Their quiet, hard-won stability was an insult Silas Thorne could not abide. Word had trickled back to him that his joke was failing. The Chinese woman and the cripple were not just surviving. They were building a life on the land he had meant as their tomb. His wounded pride demanded a response. Another rider came, this one more official. He did not speak, but simply tacked a legal notice to the cabin door with the hilt of his knife. It was a foreclosure, citing a fabricated debt Asher supposedly owed from before his injury. The document gave them until the first snows to vacate the premises. It was a death sentence disguised in legal ink. "He won't wait for snow," Asher rumbled from the porch, his voice grim as he read the notice. "He'll send men to burn us out before the month is done. He wants the land, but more than that, he wants us erased." Despair, cold and sharp, threatened to swallow Mei Lin whole. They had fought so hard, only to be crushed by the whim of a powerful man. But as she looked at Asher, she saw a new light in his eyes, a flicker of the formidable man he must have been before his injury, a dangerous glint of defiance. "There's a loose board under my cot," he told her, his voice low and urgent. "Bring me what's there." She worked the board free with a rusted iron pry bar. Beneath it, wrapped in heavy, oiled canvas, was a bundle. Inside was not a weapon, but a set of pristine leather-working tools, awls with polished wooden handles, sharp-edged cutters, intricate metal stamps, and rolls of waxed thread. "My trade," he said, his calloused hands tracing the familiar shapes with a reverence that was almost painful to watch. "Thorne took my legs, but he didn't take my hands." A plan began to form in the quiet of the cabin, a plan not of escape, but of a last desperate stand. They came at dusk, just as Asher had predicted. 3 riders, moving not with the authority of the law, but with the skulking stealth of predators. Mei Lin saw the glint of torchlight first, a wicked orange eye in the gathering gloom. Calloway was one of them. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. But Asher, whom she had helped position in the deepest shadows of the porch, was unnervingly calm. His old Winchester rifle, cleaned and oiled, rested across his lap. "When I fire," he instructed her in a low, steady voice, "you move the lamp from the main window to the small one by the hearth. Keep it moving. Make 'em think there are more of us in here." The first torch arced through the air, a comet of fire that landed on the dry roof of the small empty barn. Flames licked up the weathered sides with a hungry roar. The rifle cracked, the sound impossibly loud echoing across the silent plains. One of the riders cried out, a sharp, surprised sound, and tumbled from his saddle. Mei Lin, her hands shaking, scrambled to move the oil lamp as instructed, its light a dancing ghost in the windows. Another shot, another sharp report. A horse screamed and bolted into the darkness. Calloway, enraged, dismounted and charged the cabin on foot, his pistol blazing. A bullet splintered the doorframe inches from Mei Lin's head. She cried out, stumbling backward, a long, burning gash torn across her forearm by a shard of flying wood. Seeing Mei Lin hurt ignited a cold, lethal fury in Asher. The pain in his own useless legs was forgotten, replaced by a singular protective focus. He worked the lever of the Winchester with a brutal, mechanical efficiency, his face a mask of stone in the flickering firelight. He was no longer a broken man in a chair. He was a guardian at his post, defending his world. Calloway dove behind the stone water trough, firing wildly. Bullets tore through the thin cabin walls, punching holes of light into the darkness. "You can't hide in there forever, Blackwood," he roared, his voice raw with hatred. "We'll burn you both to cinders." He crouched, gathering himself for a final, desperate rush to the porch, to finish this once and for all. But the land, the very earth he sought to conquer, seemed to have an opinion. From the tall, dry grass near the edge of the trough there came a sound, a dry, insistent, buzzing rattle. Calloway froze, his eyes wide. He looked down. A large prairie rattlesnake, its diamond pattern clear in the firelight, was coiled and angry, disturbed by the chaos. Before he could react, it struck, its fangs sinking deep into his calf. He screamed, a high, thin sound of pure animal terror, stumbling backward and dropping his gun. He clawed at his leg, his face contorting in agony as the potent venom began its swift, devastating work. The last rider, seeing his leader fall to a foe no bullet could stop, wheeled his horse around and fled into the night. An eerie silence descended, broken only by Calloway's weakening moans and the crackle of the burning barn. The threat was over. In the chaotic light, Asher looked at Maylin's bleeding arm, his expression one of raw, protective anguish that said more than words ever could. By the following summer, the name Asher Blackwood was spoken with a new kind of reverence across the territory. From his wheelchair on the reinforced porch of his cabin, he crafted the finest saddles, bridles, and harnesses west of the Mississippi. His hands, strong and sure, guided by a lifetime of knowledge, turned supple leather into functional art. Traders, ranchers, and even the territorial governor made pilgrimages to his remote homestead, not just for his peerless work, but to catch a glimpse of the quiet, graceful woman in the impossible red silk dress who was always by his side. They called her his painted lady, a name born of ignorance that had, over time, become a legend. Maylin had learned the language of the plains, the subtle shifts of the wind, the names of the wildflowers. Her garden was a riot of color and life, providing more than enough for them to eat and to trade for supplies in town. Silas Thorne, disgraced by the failed and fatal raid and his subsequent failure to secure the railroad spur, had sold his holdings and retreated east, a diminished man. One evening, as the sun bled orange and purple across the horizon, Asher watched Maylin watering a bed of peonies she had carefully cultivated. He had spent a week building her a small, smooth ramp from the porch to the garden path. He rolled down it, the wheels silent on the planed wood, stopping beside her. He did not speak, but reached out and took her calloused hand in his. It was a simple gesture that held the weight of everything they had endured and everything they had become. A partnership forged in cruelty, tempered in fire, and finally settled into the purest form of love. The story of Maylin and Asher Blackwood is a powerful reminder that strength isn't always loud, and that the things society discards can often hold the most profound value. Their survival and triumph were built on mutual respect and a refusal to be defined by the cruelty of others. If their story of resilience and unexpected love moved you, please give this video a like to help share it with others. Consider sharing it with someone who appreciates tales of the untamed frontier. And for more stories of survival, defiance, and the hidden heroes of the American West, make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell. Now, I have a question for you. What do you think was the true turning point in Asher's and Maylin's relationship? Was it the moment she refused to leave? The night she nursed him through the fever? Or when they fought side by side to defend their home? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.